Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair all those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy world known as Eora. Whether you are a new listener, new to the World of Eora, if you are, welcome to the show by the way, or you're an old-time player and you just want to revisit some of the lore you love, welcome to the show. This is the place to do that. The hope is that as we dive into some of this information that we will have a better appreciation for Avowed when it releases, or that we can just revisit something that we know and love from a game we've played a while ago. If you are new, I will mention that episode 0 signposts you to some more of the foundational lore for things to understand because there is a lot of repeated terms, but today's episode will be very friendly to new listeners and there is no spoilers in today's episode. We are going to be talking about the main city in the second Pillars of Eternity game, Deadfire, called Neketaka. We'll be talking about each of the districts within the city. We'll be talking about the city itself, kind of some of the politics and the social issues that are going on, a little bit of its geography. As well, we'll be talking about the old city that is underneath the city of Neketaka. It's a very interesting episode. I love Neketaka. It's one of the things that draws me back to the game of Deadfire is just exploring that region and talking to the people there and soaking in the Huana culture that Obsidian created for that game. So if you've never played it, I highly recommend playing it. Of course, if you're listening to this show, you probably have. But for those who are new or just excited for Avowed, I highly recommend getting into it. It's a wonderful city. But more than happy to have you listen to today to understand a little bit more about what's going on. As far as news goes, by chance, actually, I record these episodes in pieces, and as I am currently recording this introduction to the episode, yesterday, Avowed was released for pre-order. So if you want to pre-order the game of Avowed, which is the next game set in this fantasy world called Eora, you can now do so. It's coming out on February 18th, 2025, and you can get it on pretty much every platform, including Battle.net, which is pretty new. That's, I think, a new thing that a lot of games are, I don't know, maybe they're going to be on. I don't know. I'm not really on Battle.net all that much, but still, you can get it on Windows, Battle.net, Steam, and Xbox, the series. There are the standard issue pre-orders. There's the upgrade order to premium. You can order the premium, which gives you 5 days early access, as well as some goodies for the game itself, including some skins for your companions. But you also get access to a digital art book and the original soundtrack, all of which is pretty interesting. I know on the Avowedcast Discord that I'm a part of, we're kind of having discussions back and forth about, is early access good? Is pre-orders good? Is this good for market? Is this predatory? I don't know. Me personally, I know I'm going to be happy to do it just because as a podcaster for this world, having that 5 days extra to play the game a little bit and work on creating an episode for that first week after release, I'm going to be really happy to have that space. So thank you, Obsidian, for even giving us the option. But yeah, if you do want to have the premium edition to get the game 5 days earlier than you would if you bought it standard, or if you access it on Game Pass as part of your subscription day one, you will be paying a lot, $20 extra, I think is what it is. So it's a little heftier of a price tag. There's the option. So that's the major piece of news is the Avowed is now in pre-order. There's a trailer that comes with it. I haven't dissected it yet. I don't think there's much to find, but I'm going to watch it anyways and try to come up with as much that I can. Maybe that'll be my next episode. We'll see. But either way, it's happy to finally have that information out there. As well, as part of this announcement, there's also the Steelbook edition. So there's the premium edition, but there's also the Steelbook edition. This is like the physical version of the game, but there's no disc. The game is only going to be digital. But the Steelbook version gets you a cloth map, it gets you a tin case, it gets you, they look like hood ornaments or something like that. So it gets you a few more physical items if that's what you're into. I know I'm going to try to get it, but we'll see. I haven't been able to find the pre-order for it. Maybe I have to go into an actual store, God forbid. Other than that, though, the PC specifications for the game are also released alongside this information, which was very important for me because we'll see, I'm planning on upgrading my PC to be able to play Avowed. Unfortunately, the recommended PC settings for me is a little chunkier than I was hoping for, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to hit that recommended specifications, but I'm hopeful that I can get a little bit above the minimum. We'll see. I don't have a ton of money just floating around. I have been saving up for a while, and I told all my family not to buy me Christmas gifts, to just give me like $20 each to put towards rebuilding my PC. But whatever. If I play it on Xbox, that's fine. I just like the option of having controller or mouse and keyboard, because sticking with one for too long leads to hand pain, because I do have hand pain, but being able to kind of swap back and forth kind of alleviates that. And since I'm going to be playing this game a lot, I'm really hopeful that I can switch between those two modalities. But anyways, that's more of a personal thing. That's nothing news related. Let's dive into today's lore on the city of Neketaka, the major city from the second Pillars of Eternity game.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
All right, so my source of information for today's episode is going to come from the Pillars of Eternity 2 guidebook, which I do have a physical copy of, but you can also get in your game files if you own Pillars of Eternity 2 on PC. I think you have to have the Definitive Edition or Obsidian Edition, something like that, but either way, you can have access to the official guidebook with the official lore there. I'm also going to supplement a lot of this lore with articles on the Pillars of Eternity fandom website, just to kind of fill in the other spaces. I'm going to be looking at the city of Neketaka, and I'm also going to talk about the separate districts of Neketaka, but I'm not going to go do a deep dive on all of them, because a couple of them could actually do an entire episode on their own, and I don't want this episode to be too overinflated. So we're just going to kind of do not a surface level, just kind of a little skim under the top of the waters that is the districts of Neketaka, and talking about some of its history as well. In the Pillars of Eternity 2 guidebook, chapter 1, page 13, we can read about the actual city of Neketaka. As well, we have an image alongside all of this lore to see what this looks like. Now, this city is rather massive, and it is built upon this giant mountain that is at the edge of an island, which is Neketaka Island. And this city goes from the actual shoreline and climbs all the way up to the top of the mountain where the palace of the Huana people are. The Huana people being the tribes people that have lived within the Deadfire archipelago for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The Deadfire archipelago being the setting for the second Pillars game. There is actually a second mountain off to the side of this main one that also is part of this city. The city is built into this mountain as it climbs up, and it takes hours to cross the entire city. The game actually tells you this because as you're walking from one district to another, when you're selecting the place that you want to go to next, so the game can load the map for that area, it tells you that it takes, 6 hours to travel from this corner to this corner. So it's a pretty expansive area. Granted, it's on foot, but still, hours of travel, even on foot, it can equal kilometers of distance. But, not, I guess maybe depending on how steep the elevation is. Neketaka is actually a Huana word that means serpent's head. This gives more meaning to one of the districts at the very top where the palace of this place is, called the Serpent's Crown. So I'm guessing that the head of this city, the head that is this city, is probably referencing this mountain that they are built upon. I don't know, it doesn't particularly look like a snake, but snakes are an important part of the Huana culture. They worship one of the 11 gods of this world, which we know as Bereth in other parts of the world or in the first Pillars of Eternity game. However, here in the Huana culture, they refer to Bereth as Rikuhu, and specifically they split that up into two categories of Tangaloa and Kahopa, which are these two twinned eels that devour each other at their tails. So serpents are kind of an icon within their culture, and calling this capital city Serpent's Head is rather fitting. As well, Neketaka is really interesting in the sense that it is a settlement within the Huana culture. And the reason that's important is because the people of the Huana tribes are generally nomadic. They live on island to island, and they will kind of move throughout the island or even leave an island to go to another one. This allows the land to replenish itself. It ensures that they don't stay in one area too long and destroy it. And it's just the way that they live. So they will pack up their villages and kind of move along. And you can kind of see that their structures that they build at these camps and stuff, which you can see very early on in the Pillars of Eternity 2 game. If you leave the main city of Port Mage, you can actually go to a Huana settlement. And you can see that it looks like something very easy and rudimentary to set up and even take down. So the fact that this major city for the Huana peoples is an actual permanent place that can't really move, that's rather notable for the Huana peoples. Reading from the lore book, it describes Neketaka by saying, this island's most prominent feature is this imposing subtropical mountain that has evolved into a major hub of commerce, diplomacy, and intrigue. Crumbling and ancient structures can be found in many of the Deadfire Isles, but Neketaka is the only one that contains an intact city built by ancient Huana. So this is one of the few ancient Huana structures that are still able to be used. There are a lot of ruins throughout the Deadfire Archipelago that are just abandoned and decrepit and ruins, as you can imagine. Generations have passed since the prominent Kahanga tribe settled in the abandoned husk of Neketaka, and the stone buildings have since been rejuvenated in the name of progress and prosperity. Both Rawatai and the Valian Republics have carved out their own districts of the great city where trade, defense, and other interests are represented. So the Kahanga tribe mentioned a little bit earlier, that was one of the Huana tribes. The Huana are the people that live in this entire region, but they are separated into tribes. The Kahanga tribe took over Neketaka, and as a result, they are kind of the tribe in charge of the royalty within this region. Even though each island kind of governs itself, there is this communal identity that the Huana share, and a lot of them do, for lack of a better word, bend the knee to the queen of the Kahanga tribe, Onakaza II. If you want to learn more about the Huana culture, you can listen to my episode on the Huana earlier in this podcast's life. Rawatai and Valian Republics mentioned here. Rawatai is another nation within this world, and the Valian Publics is a mercantile company out of a different nation as well, the Valian Republics. Rawatai and Valian Republics are two other nations within this world. Rawatai is further to the north, and the Valian Republics is, I believe, to the west, possibly north or south, closer to the original setting of the first Pillars of Eternity game. These are two nations of their own that are exploring the world, and they have a vested interest in the Deadfire Archipelago for their own reasons, which I discuss on an episode regarding the factions of the Deadfire game. It says here that they carved out their own districts. That's kind of true. To be fair, the queen of the Huana tribes, or I guess the Kahanga tribe, did give them permission to do so, which is kind of looked at negatively by the Huana peoples, but we learn from lore elsewhere that she did have reasoning for that, and we might cover some of that in today's episode. The Huana royalty reside on the peak of the mountain, with districts reserves for artisans, priests, foreign outposts, and laborer quarters situated along the slopes. The stone lanes, towering structures, and cleanly divided districts of Neketaka fly in the face of the Huana's traditionally tribal society, and many view the city as a dramatic shift in values. Despite its contradictions, the progress and prosperity that Neketaka has come to represent have inspired many an ambitious Huana to leave their village and embrace the city and its opportunity. So the fact that Neketaka is even being rebuilt and even being settled into more by the Huana is a dramatic shift in these people's cultures, which we see really affecting their society, especially when you get to the slums known as the Gullet, and you see just how it's failing, how the system that they originally had is failing. Because when they're in their more nomadic tribal society, they're able to share things a little more evenly. There isn't the concern that there isn't enough food to go around. But when all these people come into this one area and there isn't also enough resources within this area that can get there, now there's a concern on who is going to survive and who isn't. And this society already has a caste system which determines the lower class people are kind of meant to die. They're meant to just be born, live, and work hard and die if a famine happens so that the upper castes will survive. And the justification for this is the cycle of reincarnation that exists within this world. The idea being that if you were in a lower caste, when you die, you'll reincarnate into a higher caste. So you're just kind of fulfilling your part by being in this lower caste system. Again, if you're interested in that, you can listen to the Huana episodes I have to talk more about that. But this is just a brief description of Neketaka from the actual guidebook where the lore is described here. The city itself is split up into 5 districts. We have at the very top where the Kahanga Palace is and Queen Onakaza II resides currently in the time of the Pillars 2 game. We have Serpent's Crown. Below that, we have a location known as Pariki's Overlook. The same kind of altitude as that, but on the neighboring smaller mountain, we have the Sacred Stair. Just below the Sacred Stair is a location called the Brass Citadel, and then back on the shoreline kind of at the same level as the Brass Citadel, is Queen's Birth at the bottom of the main mountain. And then wedged between these two mountains in a ramshackle kind of way is a region called the Gullet. Now, these are the 5 main districts of Neketaka, but there is kind of a bonus 6th one, depending on how you want to approach it, which is the Old City of Neketaka. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more at length in today's episode. But just to kind of fill in some of the spaces of Neketaka, let's go to the Pillars of Eternity fandom website and see what other lore we can find there that is kind of brought in from other sources. The great and ancient city of Neketaka, which means Serpent's Head, is so old that its foundations are said to predate the great Huana cataclysm of legend. This is referring to part of the mythologies of the Huana people that say they used to be a once great civilization spread throughout the Deadfire archipelago, and they had this great city called Ukaizo, which is not Neketaka, but there was a great cataclysm that essentially destroyed their civilization, leaving them much lesser in what you see them as now. The great city of Ukaizo, which I talked about in the previous episode, was lost. And the foundations of this city of Neketaka is said to be built upon an old city that shares some of that architecture from that time. Neketaka is the only existing Huana city that dates back to these ancient times, resettling after this ancient cataclysm that caused the old city to collapse deep into the caverns below the city, which you can access in the game of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire through the Gullet, which are the slums of this city. The tribe responsible, Kahanga, which we already talked about, has rose to prominence as the result of the restoration and its intense efforts, establishing the city as a major hub of commerce, diplomacy, and, of course, intrigue. We already mentioned this stuff. So the Kahanga were responsible for also restoring the city, which is kind of why they inherited the royalty of that. In recent years, the native Huana population have been crowded by the arrival of Valian and Rauatine colonists, traders, and soldiers. Both Rauatine and Valian republics have carved out their own districts, etc., which we already talked about. The Rauatai, I've already mentioned, they're trying to basically use the Deadfire archipelago to supply their home nation with resources because their home nation does not have a lot of resources to support their peoples. The Valian republics are trying to essentially get rich, and so they're trying to see if there's anything of value in the Deadfire archipelago that they can use to make their own nation rich. As a little bit of just straight up and down data and statistics on this place, as of the year 2828 AI, which is when the second Pillars game takes place, the city has a population of 124,000 people. They are primarily Island Amawa, which is the race typically found of the Huana tribes people, as well as ocean folk. So the Island Amawa is closer to 60%, and the ocean folk is closer to 20%. Ocean folk are the main race that you see in the Valian republics, the people that are coming in here to try to see if there's something that they can basically sell. Next are coastal Amawa. They are around 15-16%. These are the typical races that you will see in Rauatai. Lastly, we have Savannah folk, mountain dwarves, and other races. Savannah folk, interestingly, come from the Shadowmill Plains. Mountain dwarves, they're everywhere. Mountain dwarves just travel everywhere because they're very explorative, so never be surprised to see that. And other races are just others. There is a limited monarchy led by Queen Onakaza II of the Kahanga tribe, and the main gods worshipped in this city are Hylia, Andra, Magran, and Bareth. Although they undergo different names within this city because of the Huana interpretations, Hylia is called Aimira, I believe. Amira. Andra, otherwise referred to as Ngati. Magran, I don't actually know if Magran has a different name in Huana. I know in Valian, she's called like Dysonis or Deaconess or something like that, but I think it's actually might still be called Magran in the Huana tribes. And Bareth, which is called Rikuhu by the Huana peoples. So these are the 4 gods that are primarily worshipped within the city, not just by the Huana, but by people coming from the outside in. Hylia, goddess of the sky and birds and song. Andra, goddess of the moon, forgetfulness in the ocean. Magran, goddess of fire and war. And Bareth, god of death, doors, portals, and cycles. All kind of feminine based, which is interesting. I mean, Bareth is a duality god. There is a feminine and a masculine form to Bareth. Bareth is more of a they, if anything else, because there's the 2 personalities. But the other 3 are distinctly feminine. So I find that interesting. Just an interesting little kind of coincidence there. The city is an economic powerhouse. They export palm oil, rice, cocoa, pearls, teak, koiki fruit, and Luminous Adra, which is a very important resource within this world. Adra basically can hold souls inside of it, and Luminous Adra has way more of that. It's way more potent. If you want to learn more about Adra, you can listen to, I think, episode 10 of this podcast. They also import wheat, cotton, textiles, leather, silk, marble, svef, and whiteleaf. Svef, and whiteleaf, they're both drugs. Whiteleaf, I think, is just marijuana. Svef, I'm not really sure what that's supposed to be the earth analog for. I don't know if it's like, because it's something that you rub into your gums, so I'm not very familiar with modern or historical drugs. Maybe this is like tobacco or some sort of opioid, I don't actually know, but it's a drug. So before we get talking about the individual districts, I have one in-game book to read called The Rise of the Cypher-Rangas, and this has to do with the line of monarchy or of the Kahanga tribe, which are in charge of Neketaka, and therefore they're kind of the royalty of the Huana peoples in a limited sort of way. Because again, each island kind of represents itself, but they all still have fealty to the queen. So this is the book you can find in-game called Rise of the Cypher-Rangas. Cypher referring to the type of person in this world. They kind of are a psionics class. They are like mental readers. They can read minds. They can project magic using other people's minds as their focus. A very interesting kind of person. You see them a lot in the first Pillars of Eternity game, explored very much. I also do an episode on them if you're interested in learning more. The book reads, the line of succession in a Huana tribe is malleable to change. One trend remains constant. Mataru warriors possessing strength, leadership, and wisdom make a natural choice for Rangas. Mataru is one of the castes. There are 3 castes within this society. I believe it goes Mataru on the top, Kawaru in the middle, and then the Roparu at the bottom. So Mataru are the top, except for the Ranga, which is the name of the leader. But yeah, so Mataru warriors possessing strength, leadership, and wisdom. So these are the primary qualities they look for in a Mataru warrior to be a Ranga, which is the leader or the queen or king, whatever you want to call them. They're a natural choice for this. The Kahanga diverged from this pattern centuries ago. Instead of choosing from accomplished fighters or hunters, the Kahanga looked to the most intellectual and tactical Mataru born. So they make a shift from strength, leadership, and wisdom to an intellect-based one, so someone who is clever and witty and things like that, which is an interesting shift because that also lines up with how some of the values in other societies, especially ones that are actually currently occupying some of the land within the Deadfire Archipelago. Recent Kahanga generations have embraced this uncommon practice by favoring ciphers in their leadership. Some believe the development to be in reaction to the spread of foreign influence in the Deadfire, but the tradition stretches farther than most credit. Onakaza II, which is the latest of the Cypher-Rangas, seems determined to not be the last of the Cypher-Rangas, as she clings to diminishing Huana sovereignty in the region. So with them having a shift in focus to the intellectual and tactical, ciphers seem to be kind of a fitting person for that. They have a lot of characteristics that they would look for in that kind of a Ranga, because they're very mentally focused. And they're typically a little more intelligent. It's, if you're going through the character creator anyways, it's usually one of the more recommended options to take. But yeah, so Queen Onakaza seems to want to continue this trend on, although she hasn't found a successor as far as I know. So this is going to be something she's going to have to take into consideration. We do learn that she is a cipher really early on. When you first interact with her, unless you get this book beforehand, you see a lot of nobles and dignitaries in her throne room, and then she kind of talks to you, but the game points out that her lips aren't moving, so it's like, oh yeah, she's speaking through your mind. You learn really quickly that she is a cipher. Rising where other tribes floundered, the Kahanga are praised for keen political maneuvering and endurance in the face of relentless trials. All that remains to be seen is how much one cipher can endure. And so that is Rise of the Cypher-Rangas, which just talks about the importance they place upon their current ideas on what leadership is and what's important. Even though Queen Onakaza II fits a lot of these qualities, there's still a lot of criticism laid at her feet because she has allowed the Valian Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company from Marawatai to not only come into the Deadfire Archipelago unchallenged, but to actually settle down and to actually start, plundering, for lack of a better word. Like the Valian Trading Company, they're going on to these islands, not just Neketaka, they're going to the islands where these tribes are, and they are bartering for trade with these Huana tribes to be able to use the land to get their own resources so that they can become, a successful company. But the thing is the Huana peoples, they're not idiots or anything like that. Like, Obsidian doesn't paint them in that kind of a regard, thankfully, which is good, but they are still a different culture. They don't really have the same understanding of the world as the Valians do. So when they strike up these conversations, there is a degree to which they don't really understand what it is they're signing on the line.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
Now, with that all said about the city of Neketaka, let's take a dive into the districts of Neketaka, the different areas within the city that make up what it is. As mentioned, there are 5 to go through. We have Serpent's Crown, Pariki's Overlook, the Brass Citadel, Queen's Birth, and the Gullet. As well, we'll be talking about a bonus 6th district, even though it's not really part of a recognized district during the times of Pillars of Eternity, the Old City underneath the Gullet. There isn't a lot of specific lore about each one of these districts, other than kind of what the purpose is behind it. There is lore within these districts. You can learn about, the Archmage Archimere, for example, and Pariki's Overlook and the Luminous Bathhouse. We can look into some details of things that we see within the region, but as for the area itself, there isn't a ton of lore about them, just more about what it is. But we do have a couple in-game books to read as well about these different areas. So first, let's start off with Serpent's Crown. Now, this is at the very top of the main mountain of Neketaka, which, if you'll remember, is translated as Serpent's Head. And so Serpent's Crown, being the top of the mountain where the palace and all the royalty and the upper class individuals are, kind of makes sense. This is the crown of the serpent's head that is the city of Neketaka. So it makes sense. In the guidebook for Pillars of Eternity 2, the lore reads, Neketaka's royal district is home to the Kahanga Palace and the seat of Queen Onekaza II, who rules in tandem with her brother, Prince Aruihi. Governance and diplomacy are in abundance in Serpent's Crown, as well as wealthy estates owned by prominent and influential business people. And so there you have it. It's the royal district, as well as kind of like the upper class district. There are like 3 or 4, I think there's only 3 large estates in this area that we get to see anyways. Serpent's Crown might be bigger than we get to play in the actual game, but as for the map, there's only 3 estates there, and these estates are rather large, especially if you had just finished coming from the Gullet where the slums are. And then, I guess the 4th estate is actually just the palace itself, where Queen Onekaza II is. And it says here that she rules in tandem with her brother, Prince Aruihi. And so this is the royal district of Neketaka, Serpent's Crown. Just south of Serpent's Crown is Pariki's Overlook, named so after the person who founded the Water Shapers Guild, which I've done an episode on if you want to listen to it. The Water Shapers Guild does exactly what it kind of sounds like. They are mastering the magic and art form that is water shaping. So, if you're thinking of waterbending from the Avatar series, you're not that far off. But obviously there's different lore and mechanics behind how all of that works. But Pariki was the person who started the Water Shapers Guild. And there's an interesting story there of some things that are going on behind the scenes. Again, if you want to hear about that, go ahead and check out my episode on the Water Shapers Guild. But this is referred to as Pariki's Overlook. One part named after Pariki, whom you can see a statue of her, I think somewhere in the center of this area, and an overlook because it's got quite the scenic view of the lands below. It's described as the Artisans District that is home to the cultural crown of Neketaka, the Water Shaper Guild, equal parts school, museum, and archive. This guild hall showcases the mystical talents of the Huana and makes for a dazzling fixture in the eyes of foreigners. As the Water Shapers are devout followers of Andra, specifically her Huana variant known as Ngati, the Water Shapers Guild makes for an opulent sanctuary devoted to the sea. The district also sports a bathhouse, a high-class establishment famous for its skin treatments using distilled luminous Andra as its chief ingredient. Its clientele are made comfortable and given room for private dealings and discreet arrangements. Last but not least, a magic shop known as the Dark Cupboard boasts some of the most exotic and powerful goods for sale on the island. Items of incredible value are locally crafted by the resident Archmage Archimere and his estate full of assisting imps. So aside from Pariki's Overlook being named so after the person, also for its scenic view, there are actually a number of rather important groups of people or even a shop. We have the Water Shapers Guild, which I already mentioned is rather important within the Society of Huana. You'll see Water Shapers not just in Neketaka, but you'll see them throughout the entire Huana culture, but this is where they do the bulk of their learning. It's also where you get one of your companions in the game called Takehu. There is also a bathhouse here called the Luminous Bathhouse, if I'm remembering correctly. For some reason, I'm having brain farts right now where I'm thinking of names and I'm wondering if I'm just calling it that or does the game call it that? Either way, there's a bathhouse there, and the water in this bathhouse features luminous Audra as a distilled luminous Audra is its chief ingredient. Now, Audra, if you've played the game before or listened to this podcast, you'll know is a shell-like crystalline substance, a semi-precious gemstone technically, and the really important thing about Audra is that it houses essence within inside of it, and essence is the stuff that souls are made of. So Audra houses within inside of it soul energy. Regular Audra houses soul energy, and luminous Audra houses more soul energy. It's got a much more dense amount of soul energy within inside of it. And people have been experimenting with luminous Audra, which is only really found in the Deadfire archipelago, and they've been learning some interesting properties that it has, especially in the beneficial sense. And it's got this a lot of people are using it for this youthful treatment stuff. It's good for your skin, it helps reverse aging, but it's also good for your soul, helps rebuild it, it helps reconnect you with the world, etc., etc., right? So there's a lot to it. I don't know whether or not a lot of those claims from the bathhouse are necessarily true, but it is a place that people flock to for rest, relaxation, as well as it says here, private dealings and discreet arrangement. Not unlike, I'm sure, the bathhouses that we see in mafia movies or something like that. Except in this one, I think anyone can go into the Luminous Bathhouse. Lastly, we have the Dark Cupboard, which is a magic shop here in Pariki's Overlook. It is owned and operated by one of the archmages of the world named Archimere. I've done an episode on the archmages if you're interested in listening on them. They are essentially a council of very powerful mages that are connected to a lot of the more esoteric lore and events that have happened within the world of Eora. Archimere being one of them. He has set up his mansion here in Pariki's Overlook and set up his magic shop, the Dark Cupboard, next door to it. You get one of your sidekicks in there. Her name is Facina, and as well, there's some interesting interactions you can have with a Huana he didn't turn into a puppet, I guess, but basically there was a Huana person whose soul was placed in that of a wooden puppet, and now he can tell you your fortune for 1 copper piece. It's a very interesting place to go. There's lots of, as you would guess, unique magical items there, and those unique magical items can offer some lore, expanding on the world that this game is set in. So that's Pariki's Overlook, one of my more favorite places to spend time in, just because there's a lot of variety and interesting things. There's a couple of shops there, there's a blacksmithy, and more side quests to be found. And breaking into Archimere's Manor is also one of the more fun times, particularly because you get to interact with the imps. And the imps are hilarious. I believe they're all voiced by Sam Riegel of Critical Role, and they're just hilarious. And they have really dumb names, I don't know, Stinktooth or something stupid like that. Fetid Ooze or something, I don't know. Anyways, very fun. But let's continue moving south. We're going to talk about Queen's Birth. This is actually the first place that you go to when you travel to Neketaka for the first time in the game. You land in the port of Queen's Birth, and it's largely controlled or at least populated by members of the Valian Republics, or more specifically the Valian Trading Company. In the lore book, it's described as, Valia's ambitious trading company asserted its mercantile presence in the Deadfire. The queen of the Huana's Kahanga tribe recognized the need to keep an eye on the foreign bankers and investors. She gifted the Valian Republics the district of the city in which was their first ships made port as a welcoming gesture. Many see it as her first of many concessions to dominating foreign powers, imbuing Queen's Birth with an air of exploitation and collusion. So there's definitely some controversy surrounding Queen's Birth, because this is the first place that you stop when you go to Neketaka. It is the main port of Neketaka, and it is basically under the control and influence of the Valian Republics, and more specifically the Valian Trading Company. And this is something that Queen Onakaza II granted to the Valian Republics when they were expanding into the Deadfire archipelago and exploring the world. And a lot of the Huana peoples have looked at this as a concession that she made that I think a lot of people criticize and think is going to lead to the downfall of the Huana people. There's a little bit more going on there. Queen Onakaza is a bit more crafty and sly than that, And I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that she wants to keep an eye on these people. I think she recognizes the power that they hold and how much, if they were just to decide to run rampant, the damage they could cause. And I think keeping them constrained to an area where you can also observe them might actually be a pretty strong tactical approach, but definitely a risky one. There is a book that you can read in the Second Pillars game called A Recent History of Queen's Birth, The Arrival of the Valians, which describes, as it says, the recent history of Queen's birth. And since it has to do with what we're talking about here, we'll take a look at what it has to say. This is excerpted from a letter by Wingi Wariki, a Huana historian, and this is a collection from her personal writings. It starts off saying, "The Valians' arrival in Neketaka was not expected. Our fisherfolk had watched them lurk near the edges of our territory for months. Their ships, like the keen eyes of a jeweler, inspecting us, already counting the coin they'd make on a prize so fine as the Deadfire. They were not the first to watch us so. Doubtless they will not be the last. We were not certain what it was they wanted. At first, aside from whatever it was we had, when Onakaza sent an envoy of Mataru to speak with them," you'll remember Mataru is the upper class in the caste system that the Huana people have, "they made noise about desiring trade and cultural exchange. What exactly it was they intended to trade, or what manner of cultural exchange they thought might entice us, wasn't immediately clear." Alright, so far we have the Valians are just skirting along the edge of the Huana territory in the Deadfire, and they are basically trying to make the claim that we're here for trade and cultural exchange, love and peace kind of a stuff. Obviously, I mean, it could be genuine. I have a feeling just from interacting with the Valian trading company that that's not the real purpose. I suppose that will also happen, but I don't think that is the main purpose. So a little bit of trickery going on there. "We were not naive. We know their arrival spelled change for the Deadfire as surely as we know that rain falls in the monsoon season. The trouble came in how we would manage the Valians' influence. How would we contain it? Better they think us partners than easy marks, the thinking of the palace went at the time. We could not risk war with them, as a fractured people as we are, and have a hope of winning it, no matter the power of our water shaper. As the leader of the Kahanga, Onakaza decided for us. She allowed the Valians to set down roots in Queen's Birth, and begin limiting mining operations in the archipelago. She suggested this might ease trade and tensions between our people and theirs, but, in truth, I believe she only wanted to keep an eye on them. I sympathize with her point of view, but I cannot endorse it, because Onakaza forgot the truth of roots, that they are the silent grasping hands of trees, and that once a tree is established, it cannot be moved without destroying the ground around it." So here, Wingi Wahariki, I always butcher this name, Wingi Wahariki. Anyways, this historian of the Huana peoples is criticizing Onakaza's decision for allowing the Valians to set up camp at Queen's Birth. I say set up camp, but they have actually set up more of a permanent settlement there with like buildings and roadways and fountains, etc., etc. He notes here that it definitely, like, the Deadfire was going to change. Like, we had these people who are interested in their homeland, and they're moving in, whether we like it or not, kind of thing. Like, so, like, change is going to happen. It's just how did we respond to it? And he's critical of Onakaza's decision to let them settle down. That she seemingly might be doing this to keep an eye on them, but he kind of uses an allegory with tree roots, saying that, like, once you allow this tree to set up roots here, you're going to have to destroy the very ground that it's in if you decide you want to remove it. And I think even if you tried to like move that allegory from a tree to like a weed or something like that, like there's some level of truth there, at least the idea that this historian is trying to get across. Just a couple more little paragraphs and we'll be through. It reads, "But it was done. The Valians quickly made themselves at home, and the ensuing conflict over who had rights to which islands, which Adravanes, and which trading routes only served to fracture the Huana further. And then the Rowantayans arrived. By that point, it was too late. The colonials were in the Deadfire to stay. Now Huana refugees flood into Neketaka from across the archipelago, complaining of lost land and dwindling resources, and the trading companies fight a quiet war against each other with our doorstep as the front. Ngati guide us in this trying time." The last part of this book, I think, really shines a light on what a large portion of the conflict and big problem for the Huana is here. You have the Valian Trading Company, which have now established a more permanent settlement, and they are starting to colonize the actual islands themselves where the Huana people are living, which is problematic in and of itself already, right? Like they're going into these islands, they're draining it of resources, they are causing these people to have to move out and seek refuge in the city of Neketaka. The thing is, though, is that Neketaka is not a city that was built up with the idea that this is what people would be living here for, right? Like this is an ancient city that the Kahanga tribe rebuilt and established, but it wasn't necessarily created to house an influx of Huana from the surrounding islands. And that's a problem that's happening within Neketaka, is that there are so many people who are being displaced from their island villages to the city of Neketaka that there isn't enough to go around. This city is all put on a mountain. There are no fields by which to make food. And even if you use the surrounding area to generate food, you can only generate so much food and resources for the people in the city. But as the population continues to swell, but the amount of resources doesn't continue to go up, you can see you obviously run into a problem. And this is happening because of the colonization of the Valians as well as the Rawatayans, who arrived shortly after the history recorded in this letter. And so that's the region of Queensbirth. For me, it's one of the more interesting ones to look into, particularly because it's the first place you get run into when you go to Neketaka, but also the history there with the Valians. I've always found that faction interesting. I don't think I've ever sided with them. I'm not really big on their values, but they definitely are an interesting group, and I think really well written by the people over at Obsidian. Next, we'll move east towards the smaller mountain that is Neketaka, and we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. We have here the Brass Citadel. In the lore book, it is described as, when Rawatai settled their naval force in the region, they carved out a section of Neketaka for their own as a defensive structure, hardly expecting to involve themselves in the city's complex political posturing. As such, the Brass Citadel is primarily a fortress with storehouses for keeping Rawatai's hardworking sailors fed, armed, and paid on the long campaign away from home. If you're interested in learning more about the Royal Deadfire Company, which is a company representing the interests of the nation of Rawatai in the Deadfire Archipelago, you can listen to an episode I've done on them as well. But in short, Rawatai is a nation all of its own, but it is very resource scarce. The ground is hardy, and not a lot of things can grow there. But they did have a lot of resources that were good for building armaments and ships and things like that. So they have a very strong army, but they don't have enough places to get resources to sustain their people. As a result, people from Rawatai have had to go explore the world of Eora to be able to set up plantations in other areas, for example. And that's what they're trying to do here in the Deadfire Archipelago. And they have set up shop on this other side of Neketaka, on this smaller mountain, and set up a Brass Citadel. The area used to be, as the Huana describe it, a fishing hole for them. So local Huana would go to this area to go fishing, but it has now been completely made by a stronghold. Right, so like you have towers made of stone and brick and walkways and large staircases. You have a storehouse for all of these items that the Rawatayans are holding on so they can keep their soldiers and merchants fed and armed and paid. Outside of this, there's not a ton of information about the Brass Citadel. It's basically just a stronghold that Rawatai, through the Royal Deadfire Company, set up, and they call it the Brass Citadel. There's some really interesting dialogue when you play the game, however, discussing of like, well, what is better? Is this Brass Citadel better, which is essentially like an efficient machine that can do lots of stuff here for people? Or was it better to leave it as a watering hole and as a fishing hole? Not a watering hole, sorry, but as a fishing hole, right? A nice scenic place, obviously, good for a little bit of resources, but wasn't being utilized to maybe its maximum potential, as some people might think. And you, as a player character, can weigh in on this conversation. It doesn't have much impact in the game itself, but it's just an interesting conversation to be a part of. Lastly, we're going to talk about the Gullet. The Gullet are the slums of Neketaka, and it is the region wedged between these two mountains of Neketaka. So I've mentioned there's the one on one side that has Serpent's Crown, Pariki's Overlook, and Queen's Birth, and then there's a smaller mountain that houses the Sacred Stair and the Gullet, and we'll talk about the Sacred Stair in a bit. The Gullet is between these two mountains, and it is essentially the slums of the city. All of the refuse and the garbage and everything that is coming from the top, working its way down, goes into this huge gully between these two mountains, deep into where the ancient part of Neketaka is referred to as the Old City. And the Raparu caste of the Huana tribes are now living in the Gullet, and they are essentially living along these incredibly steep slopes of these two mountains in kind of a ramshackle set of houses. There's quite literally like these wooden houses that are just built off of the sides of the mountain. If you were walking on one of these walkways and fell off, you would just plummet into the old city and die there. So, it is not a place that people would choose to live. It is a pretty awful place. But anyways, let's read the description for the gullet. Recent struggles have displaced thousands of Huana from their home islands around the Deadfire, far more than Neketaka was ever intended to support. Those of the laboring class with little means and nowhere else to turn invariably find themselves in the gullet, a half-collapsed portion of the city that hangs over a dark and treacherous drop. So I don't think that this description necessarily does justice to just how awful the living conditions are. There's literally at one point you can go to, there is just a pile of refuse. This is just discarded food, and that's where a lot of people in the gullet go looking for food. It's like dumpster diving, but much, much worse, as well as a lot of literal refuse in the form of this is where their sewer system basically pours out into, kind of a thing, right? Pours into the old city, and these people are living in this kind of jury-rigged set of homesteads just hanging above this old city. But this is where people have to go because there's no more room within the city itself necessarily. As I've mentioned before, and it mentions here, Neketaka wasn't intended to support the population that is going into it right now, and so a lot of people don't have much choice but to move to the gullet, especially if you're of the Roparu caste. You're not really going to have much chance anywhere else. And then once you're there, to a certain degree, you're kind of stuck there because unless you find a way to gather the resources to be able to leave, you're not going to survive the journey anywhere else. And you kind of have to rely on the people that are around. But the gullet is also home to a lot of criminal activity just as the result of the poor living conditions that is in. Now, interestingly enough, there is one more section of Neketaka to talk about, and that is the Sacred Stair, outside of talking about the old city, perhaps. But for some reason, the Sacred Stair isn't in the guidebook. I looked in there and I didn't see it, so I don't know if maybe I'm just missing something or it's located somewhere else. But either way, the Sacred Stair is on the fandom website, so I'm going to read the description off of that, just a little short one. Sacred Stair is described as this is so called after the massive stairs left behind by the ancient Huana. The Sacred Stair is the temple district of Neketaka, housing temples dedicated to the major gods worshipped by the Huana and their new arrivals. So this is just the religious district, right? There are a lot of stairs here, which is why it'd be called the Sacred Stair. And along this rising staircase are little outcroppings, if you will, where temples are. There's a temple to Berith, there's a temple to Magrin, there's a temple to Aethisp in the form of Gon. There's theoretically temples for any of the gods that are being worshipped in the area. Those are the main ones that I'm thinking of. There's some interesting lore here as well. There are some animancers, which are soul scientists, that have set up shop on one of the spires here, and they are performing experimentations to see if they can use Adra veins, which is veins of natural deposits of these Adra, if they can use them as a teleportation system of some sort. At least that's what they're trying to aim for. To what degree are they successful? I'll leave to you to find out by playing the game or listening to my episode on that very topic. But that's the Sacred Stair. And now that we've kind of gone through all of the main sections of this city, it's time to talk about Neketaka's old city and a bit more about the history of Neketaka itself. So Neketaka's old city lies underneath the gullet, which I've already described a little bit at length for you guys here, so you're familiar with it. And this is the ancient part of Neketaka that the more new version of Neketaka is built upon. This isn't something new with cities. This is actually something that we even see in our own Earth world. There are cities that are built over top of old destroyed buildings, things that were at different levels. I think I went to, I don't know if it was Seattle or Portland or something like that, and I did a little tour underneath the downtown district of one of these cities that showed these entranceways and spaces to old businesses and old buildings that were just sort of built on top of each other, and then the street was kind of raised, or they built walkways above these old things, and eventually as they were trying to level the city out, these older buildings just basically got put underground. So the idea that you can build on top of a city is a pretty actual normal thing. The thing that isn't necessarily as normal, I would say, is the amount of just sheer, awful, grotesque stuff, I guess, that is inside the old city. So let's go to the fandom article here to just kind of read the background of what it is. Beneath the gullet lies a vast cavern littered with the remains of an ancient city. Referred to simply as the Old City by the denizens of Neketaka, this sunken metropolis is notable for two reasons. One, the Old City's architecture is markedly different in style, form, and apparent use from the architecture of modern Neketaka, and there is no readily available explanation for the Old City's destruction that has not already been considered and discounted by those inclined to study it. Moreover, the Huana's tastes show a clear preference for designs that mimic the rhythm and shape of the natural world. The Old City shows none of these things. Regardless of its origins, the Old City is filled with undead vessels and other monstrosities. Although it's filled to the brim with ancient history, the Huana mostly use it for executing criminals rather than exploration. So there are a few sections to this area in gamey terms. There is the Overlook, there is the Ruins, there is the Old City. And there is also exits to another section of Neketaka that we haven't really talked about, and that is technically part of the Gullet, which is referred to as Delver's Row. There is a criminal organization that exists within the city of Neketaka. I don't think that's going to be very surprising for anyone, even though you don't know about it at first. So I don't know if I consider this a spoiler, the idea that, like, oh, there's criminals in this giant city. Like, yeah, of course there is. And there is a way to kind of, from the underside, get to where they are hiding from the Old City. But I'm not actually sure if you can get there the first time you go, or if you need to have some sort of special key, or if you need to know the criminals already. I can't really recall. But you need to have some way to get out of the Old City, because when you first arrive in the Gullet, you can convince the person in charge there to allow you to be lowered into the Old City to explore for things and fulfill quests. And the guy says, okay, we'll let you go down. We'll lower the elevator into the Old City from here in the Gullet. But if you're not back after a half day's time, we're raising that elevator whether you're there or not. You're going to be trapped. So the game developers had to create a way out. But yeah, so there is a criminal organization that exists within Neketaka. I'm not going to talk about it at length because there's some stuff in there that you're going to want to discover for yourself. But returning to the Old City, so we have these different sections within the city themselves. The Overlook is pretty grotesque. This is the part that you first access, and it's here that you can see nests of grubs. You can find skulldrake creatures roaming the area. There are things like rotghasts that are walking around. There's literally massive piles of decaying corpses down here. There are areas that if you walk through, your player becomes sickened in a gamified sense. There's really grotesque sounds going on. Like, it's just an awful place. And like, this is where all of like the sewage system empties out to. This is where the garbage gets thrown into. This is where the dead are. And this is where like creatures like oozes are just like proliferating. It's a truly awful place. It's crawling with undead, and it's not a place that you really thought that you can go down into and survive it. There are some interesting things down here. If you listen to my previous episode on the Talking Sword Modweir, you can actually find Modweir down here. As well, if you're exploring the ancient city or the old ruins, you can learn some interesting things. There is a boss fight in the area, but you can also see a mural that depicts the lost city of Ukaizo, the mythical city of Ukaizo, which I did an episode on recently as well. There's a lot that can be seen down here, and there's also a lot of interesting quests that take you here. As well as there's even a couple of Easter eggs items. The only one that comes to mind, though, is the Cog of Ko. That's C-O-G of C-O-A-H. And I think that refers to the content creator Ko Carnage. He was a backer for Pillars of Eternity 2, and so I think he donated enough to the campaign that they made a special item for him, and you can find it here in the Old City. But returning back to the lore that I just read, so we learned that it's beneath the Gullet, it's a vast cavern, there's an old ancient city. The Huana don't really think of this place as a place to explore, they more so just send people down there to die, and that's where they throw all their garbage and refuse. But there is a difference in architecture between what we see in the Old City and what we see in the current version of Neketaka. And there was a little bit on this website that I didn't read because there is a in-game book that I would like to rather read from that has lore from within the game itself. And this is a book that you can find, obviously in the second Pillars of Eternity game, called On the Provenance and Ruination of Neketaka's Old City. And so this is a letter. It's an excerpt from a lecture that's been given at an academy regarding architectural history. This tells us a lot about the old city of Neketaka. We're going to read from this before we close out today's episode. So this is an excerpt from a lecture given before the annual convention of the Academy of Architectural Historians in Adir. So this is an Adiran historian specializing in architecture, and this is part of his lecture he gave. It reads, "Close examination by learned parties suggests that Neketaka is significantly older than it might first appear." And we've already kind of discussed this at length about Neketaka as it is being built upon an even older city. We take as our example the suppurating wound in the city's side, which is kind of the gully between the two mountains, which the locals most charmingly refer to as the gullet. On its face, it is not considerably different from your average slum. Indeed, it contains all that one might expect of such a place: desperate poverty, wrenching hunger, a tavern fare brimming with miscreants, and a flourishing criminal culture. Of course, it has its own unique offering as well, a towering pile of garbage dumped into the district from a more affluent neighborhood above it. It is, in every sense, abominable, and the Huana leadership should be ashamed. So just a little bit of a description of the gullet and the slums itself, as well as some commentary on the morality and the social nature of it. Clearly thinking that this is an abomination and then criticizing the Huana leadership for allowing it. Although, as we've already discussed on this episode, it's kind of I wouldn't say a necessity in the sense of like it's okay, but it's like this is happening because there doesn't seem to be much other option at this point, as the Huana leadership are obviously hoping to find a solution. But I digress. Far more interesting than the caste stratifications among the Huana are the bones their city is built upon, for beneath the gullet lies a vast cavern littered with the remains of an ancient city. Referred to simply as the Old City by the denizens of Neketaka, this sunken metropolis is notable for two reasons. You'll notice this is exactly what we were reading off of the previous website. The city's old architecture is markedly different in style, form, and apparent use from the architecture of modern Neketaka, and there is no readily available explanation for the old city's destruction that has not been considered or discounted by those inclined to study it. My peers here in the Academy and beyond believe that the old city's destruction is clearly the fault of the region's energetic volcanism and subsequent tectonic rumblings. I would caution against grasping at such easy solutions, however. So I kind of rushed through that part that we've repeated. Here he is kind of stating, and this is the point in his lecture, that he's like, it is commonly held by a lot of smart people that this is what we think happened. Volcanoes and earthquakes destroyed the old city. But he is about to introduce a different idea. And so he asks us to consider the following. The Huana have lived in the region for thousands of years. Earthquakes are no more a surprise to them than are the archipelago's daily soaking rains. None in Eora match their sheer creativity and expertise in building to withstand these events. And I see that as a fair point. I know when I watch movies of people that live in, like, I don't know, California maybe, I'm not really sure, but they live in different parts of the world where when an earthquake happens, they just kind of very calmly grab anything nearby to stop it from falling over, and they just resume their daily life. Maybe they text someone about it. I don't know. But for me, I don't experience anything like that at all. And I know if it was me, I would probably freak out because it's not something I'm used to. But you see cultures in all sorts of the world that are used to earthquakes, and it's just sort of something they've learned to deal with. So this is a pretty decent point. Moreover, for all their flexibility in building construction, the Huana's tastes have proven to be remarkably stable over time, showing a clear preference for designs that mimic the rhythm and shapes of the natural world. The Old City shows none of these things. Indeed, what remains was constructed primarily of stone cut in austere blocks, and the buildings are arranged in a manner not dissimilar from those prevalent in the Ingwithan ruins that dot the landscape. With those 2 points in mind, does it not seem prudent to ask whether the Old City is Huana in origin, and if it is not, who built it, and finally, what destroyed it? So you can get this book in a place called Tikawara in the Kuwaru Hut. It's hidden in a drawer on the left. No, it just said that here, so I'm going to point it out. But anyway, so this last part here talks about how the actual architecture of the Old City doesn't seem to match a lot of architecture that we see in modern Huana styles. It doesn't even seem to be like derivative, I think is what he's getting at. So it doesn't even seem like it's something that would have evolved from this point. It looks like completely different kind of architecture that not only we see today, but we see in other ruins. And he compares it to Ingwithan ruins. Now, if you've played the First Pillars game or you've listened to any of my episodes about the Ingwithans, you'll know that they're an ancient civilization of people. They existed thousands of years ago, and they were fairly advanced in science and culture, etc., and then they just disappeared. Their civilization basically went extinct, and they are gone now, and there is some mystery as to why. Of course, you do learn a little bit more in the First and Second Pillars game about them, but I'm not going to talk about spoilers here. Regardless, it's very interesting to see that the Old City doesn't match the same architectural stylings of the Huana people, because it does then throw into question of, were the Huana people the ones who created this, or did the Ingwithans have something to do with it? Now, if you've listened to my episode on Ukaizo or any of the ancient civilizations of the Deadfire Archipelago, such as the History of Eora series part 3 that I did recently, then you'll know a little bit more about what's going on there, and I don't want to discuss that here because it's very spoilery and it's not terribly related to what we're talking about. But there's definitely some other influences that could have, for sure, it's never confirmed, but there's definitely other influences that could have had an impact on why the Old City is created the way it is, why its architecture is the way it is. Because there are Ingwithan ruins in the Deadfire Archipelago, so we do know they were present, and we do know that they were a powerful nation, so they certainly might have been interacting with the ancient Huana in such a way that they would influence how they built things, or maybe the Ingwithans helped them build things. Who knows how long the Huana people have been in this nomadic style for. And that opens up a lot of questions when you start to dive more into the Huana culture and its mythologies, which again, I've done episodes on. If you want to listen to them, go ahead. But when you see this old city that is different in architecture, built underneath a new city that people are living in, even though it was never meant to house Huana in the way that they are currently using it, it asks some interesting questions that you can correlate with these mysteries and secrets that you've been discovering in the Deadfire if you've been playing through the game. Asking, what are the origins of the Huana? Why do we have Ingwithan ruins here? What was their role within the Huana society, and what was the Huana society like? Is the ancient city of Ukaizo just a myth, or is it real? Is it based upon this old city? Is it somewhere else? What's going on? There's a lot of really interesting questions that can be asked, and a lot of them that can also be answered throughout playing the game. But that, I think, is everything that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to close it out here by asking, what might this have to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
I think arguably there's not really much that this will have to do with Avowed. I think just in the lead up for Avowed, especially with there being cameos from the Deadfire game being in the game of Avowed, I think it's really important to be looking a lot at the lore of Deadfire right now. As well, a lot of people are playing it. There's been a surge in players for that game. As well, there are a number of Let's Plays or live streams. I know Centigraphs has, in recent months, started his Deadfire playthrough. And on the Obsidian Twitch page, they are doing their Deadfire playthrough currently as they gear up for the release of Avowed. And I know myself, I've been playing Avowed here and there, just a little moments here and there. I started a playthrough actually pretty recently of all Chanter / Ranger party, focusing on summoning, so I'm just like dominating the battlefield with everything. I've already mentioned that. One thing I didn't mention though about that is that every time I have the option to attack, every time I have the option to attack in dialogue, I select it just to see what happens. And so it's led to some pretty interesting outcomes, because I'm normally very cordial in the game and I'm role-playing as such, but then when the option comes to just, attack and kill somebody, I'm like, well, okay, here we go. And it's just been fun to see what happens. But anyways, that's beside the point. I don't think that the old city is really going to come up in Avowed. The only thing I can think of is something relatable in the sense of we're going to find ancient ruins in the game of Avowed within the Living Lands setting. Possibly ruins built underneath other ruins, or ruins of a culture that we didn't expect to find there. Like maybe we'll find Ingwithan ruins, and it's like, wow, what is this doing here? What were they doing in the Living Lands? I could see something like that. So I can see a parallel kind of motif that the Deadfire has with the old city and with the city of Neketaka being evolved in Avowed in the Living Lands, but I don't see a direct correlation. One other thing that could happen, I suppose, is we are an envoy of the nation of Adir. Perhaps the Deadfire Archipelago will send an envoy from there, and it seems very likely that it would be someone from the city of Neketaka themselves. Perhaps it'll be someone in Onikaza's family, perhaps it'll be someone from the Water Shapers Guild, maybe we'll get to see Takehu again, who knows, right? But so I could see maybe a person from Neketaka coming, but I don't see a lot about Neketaka or the old city itself having to do with Avowed. That's just my opinion. If you have any different thoughts on the matter, or you thought of something I didn't, please send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, and I'll happily update it on the show. But yeah, that's everything for today's episode. So what I've been playing lately is what usually I talk about, as I'm still playing Veilguard. I paid full price for the game of Veilguard, so I'm going to play that game until Stalker 2 comes out on Game Pass, and then I'm going to try that game out instead. So by the time this episode comes out, that'll be nearing pretty close to the end there, so I'm just going to be doing that. So I'm playing Veilguard. I've been having an interesting time with Veilguard. I started off, I really, really liked it. And then as I went, I found myself really, really not enjoying it. And now I'm kind of around level 30-ish. I'm nearly 20 hours in the game, and I'm coming back around to really enjoying it again. So it's been a roller coaster. There's been these moments where I'm enjoying the writing and I'm thinking, this is really well done. And then I'm also going through these large parts of the game where I'm like, this is awful quest design. The writing here is just subpar. And not just because it's BioWare, right? Like, so it's been like up and down and back and forth. And I also have yet to hear them utter the phrase Veilguard at any point. So I'm like, I'm wondering why they did that. Like, why did you rename the game from Dreadwolf, which sounds awesome, to the Veilguard, which is still pretty cool, but I don't know. They don't bring it up. They bring the Dreadwolf up a lot. And I think I'm seeing a lot of what I think are influences of Baldur's Gate 3, which had such a huge focus on companions. This game also has a huge focus on companions as well. I'm wondering if that had something to do with the name change to the Veilguard, because, you know, you and your companions are the Veilguard. I wish they had, at this point, would say that that's what they are. I don't know. I don't really care that much. I'm still enjoying the game. The combat, now that I have like leveled up instead of hoarding points, is way more fun. The enemies that are tough are actually fun to go and fight against. There's this one mission where I basically had to go do arena battles 10 times in a row, and I actually really enjoyed that. It was a little easy for me, but I have the settings turned down pretty far. So, but yeah, I've been enjoying Veilguard. I know it's controversial for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to be honest, I can understand why regarding some controversies, not others. There's a couple controversies that, frankly, I don't really care to talk about. But, you know, like regarding like where the fan base is at with this game, I can understand that, and I sympathize with that. Just as for personally, though, you know, I play an hour of the game, and right now I'm walking away going, I'm glad I spent the hour doing that. Will it hold my attention when Stalker comes out? I don't know. I am a little bought into the story. I do, now that I've put this much time and effort into it, want to see it finished, but I don't think I'm going to want to play Veilguard as much as I'm going to want to play Stalker based off what I've seen of Stalker. But I suppose we'll wait and see what happens then. Then after that, though, then Indiana Jones is coming out, and a whole other slew of games shortly thereafter. So I don't know. Will I finish Veilguard? I don't know. Is anyone else playing Veilguard? If you have any thoughts, let me know. worldofeora@gmail.com. But that's going to be it for today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to email me, ask me a question, or leave a criticism, leave a comment, anything like that, or just have a conversation about this world, this game, Avowed coming out, or whatever you're playing, you can do so at worldofeora@gmail.com. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at worldofeora. If you would like to support the show directly, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. That is not something that I expect from anyone. It's just there for those who get value out of supporting shows that they like. However, I haven't said this in a while. If you do want to support the show, but you're like, I don't want to like do so financially, totally understandable. Consider leaving a rating or review, especially if you're on Apple, or if you're on Spotify, leaving a comment. This lets the algorithms know that there is engagement with the audience base, and then it starts recommending the shows to other people who might listen to similar things, and it helps the show get seen a little more. I don't really care about numbers necessarily, but if it's something you're looking to do to help other people find it, to grow that influence a little bit, then by all means, help me out that way. But if you're just happy to continue listening, please do. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode on the city of Neketaka and the old city underneath it from the Second Pillars of Eternity game. We talked about the city itself, what the problems are that's going on right now with the social issues happening at the time and place that they're in, as well as the old city and all the districts that we see there. There's obviously a lot more we could talk about in finer detail, but I might save some of those for episodes down the road. We'll see. There's a lot of content to chew through before Avowed even gets here. So this podcast has been going on for a few years now, and I'm sure it can go on for a few more longer. We'll see. But anyways, thanks for listening to today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.